The pasts of the fallen Jedi Baylan Skoll and Shin Hati have been a mystery to us, shrouded in the dark side of the Force, as are their very motivations. The only thing that clued us into anything about them was their orange lightsabers and their status as Dark Jedi. It later came out that Balin was a former Jedi survivor of Order 66, and to back this up, he would later reveal a certain soft spot that he had for the Jedi Order and any survivors of it. In the beginning, he would even express remiss for having to confront Ahsoka at all. In his words, it would be a shame to have to kill her. There are so few Jedi left. For the longest time, this line, as well as the brief one that we got about Anakin from the trailers, gave us the impression that Balin had at one point been a friend, or at least had been fond of the Chosen One. But we were completely wrong. It was in fact the exact opposite. Balin hates and resents Anakin and Ahsoka by proxy. We found this incredibly intriguing, so of course there was only one thing to do: open a holocron and explain exactly why Balin's hatred for Anakin will likely be justified, but why it will also affect his overall motivations in finding Grand Admiral Thrawn. One thing that immediately jumps out to me is that we have yet to actually see a side of the Jedi Order that agrees with the decisions of the Jedi Council. Most of the time, we see stories from the perspective of people like Qui-Gon Jinn, who were renegades and rebels of the High Council, going their own way and listening to the will of the Force rather than the doctrine established by the Council. We have often been shown a very one-sided perspective on Anakin's story within the Order, mainly by people who supported him and wanted him to have been trained regardless of his age or his past connections. What we have not yet seen is a side of the Jedi that actually agreed with the Council's judgment about the young boy. It's an often overlooked fact that Mace Windu and Yoda were right. The boy was not ready to be trained, and he did in fact fall and embrace the dark side. Now, there are many caveats to this. Obviously, the High Council shared a good amount of responsibility for this fall. It was their heavy-handedness and negligence that brought him to the point of desperation, to where he turned to Palpatine. And of course, Qui-Gon wasn't there to fulfill his duty as Anakin's mentor and father figure. None of this is disputed, but anyone who was against Anakin's training is often vilified or treated as ignorant, even though they predicted what ultimately came to pass, and Anakin did fall. Balin seems to have been a part of this exact side of the Order. It's explored a little bit more in the comics, but the Jedi were completely divided about Anakin's training. And it was not so cut and dry. This was not just a decision that was made within the council chamber walls, but almost everyone in the Order eventually came to know about Skywalker and the decision to train him. Though very few members were privy to the information that Anakin was the suspected Chosen One, nevertheless, he was the scorn of certain elders and the envy of his peers, outcasts and ostracized because he was progressing far faster than the other younglings despite his older age. But there were many like Balin who may not have treated Anakin poorly, but did not believe he needed to be trained at all. These members of the Order didn't want to wait long enough to see their suspicions bearing fruit, as during his teenage years, Skywalker was known for being brash and not keeping protocol, or his control in general. He gained a reputation as a maverick just like Qui-Gon during the Clone Wars, and as Balin accurately pointed out to Ahsoka, everyone in the Order knew Anakin Skywalker. To some, he was the hero with no fear, but to many others, he was the Jedi that constantly was putting innocent lives at risk with dangerous maneuvers and gambles with risky plays, especially during certain missions over the Clone Wars. Anakin constantly defied direct orders and left the destruction in his wake. Good intentions to be sure, results aside. Just like Jedi like Luminara Unduli was kind to Anakin, but still acknowledged his dangerous tendencies. For a long time, even Obi-Wan Kenobi was a part of this crowd, and he only trained Anakin at first because Qui-Gon Jinn had asked him to in his dying moments. Obi-Wan was the one who kept the code and adhered to the orders of the Council. While he would relax a bit more eventually and come to love and appreciate Anakin for his differences, Kenobi still got irritated by his Padawan's cavalier attitude. But as Baylan proves, there was a small pocket of people within the Order who took a more Mace Windu approach to their view on Anakin. They considered him dangerous, a ticking time bomb to explode any day. Perhaps it was this exact suspicion that kept Baylan ahead of Order 66 and Vader's attack on the Jedi. His resentment towards Anakin deepened into one of hatred that likely fostered the dark side within the young Jedi Balin. Baylan refers to Ahsoka's master by his first name, suggesting a level of deeper familiarity. This is important because almost all of the other Jedi simply called him Skywalker. It was a general Jedi practice to refer to others by their surname unless they preferred otherwise. We see in the comics, shows, and deleted movie scenes that just about everyone outside of Anakin's inner circle calls him Skywalker, yet Baylan does not. This could mean several things, especially when we take into account a couple other factors. First, Ahsoka doesn't know Baylan, which isn't exactly surprising since there were 10,000 Jedi around the time of the Clone War. Not all of them knew each other, but one might think that Ahsoka would be vaguely familiar with anyone that Anakin frequently interacted with. Second, to back up the first point, Ahsoka even says that Anakin never mentioned Baylan. So why is this important? It could suggest one of two things. Baylan was simply referring to Anakin by his first name to get under Ahsoka's skin, so she had her mind on her emotions instead of the fight at hand, thus giving him a mental advantage. Classic Dunmok technique. Either that, or the more interesting answer, which is that Baylan interacted with Anakin a lot when Anakin was younger in his Padawan years. Judging by Baylan's age, he wouldn't have been that much older than Anakin. Perhaps by around 10 years if Baylan was a knight when Anakin was a Padawan. Perhaps he was one of the people that harshly discouraged or maybe even bullied the young Skywalker in his journeys. Ahsoka does not know much about Anakin's past as a slave for most of her training under him, and Obi-Wan had to explain this to her. But their relationship between Baylan and Anakin goes even further. Baylan holds Ahsoka accountable as well. He believes what Ahsoka believes deep down within herself, that perhaps if she had been there, perhaps if she had stayed by his side, he would have never turned. Baylan is also likely disgusted by Ahsoka, deeming her as a failure of a Jedi, somebody who walked away from the path just as she walked away from her very master. Ahsoka's allegiance to the Jedi Order is loose, and this likely angers Baylan a great deal. Baylan indeed cares about the Jedi, but only the dark side could save him from destruction, so he embraced it. But he vowed to never do what it did to Vader. Baylan likely lives as a representation of how power is to be used responsibly. It's a big, loud statement that he believes he is much stronger and wiser of Vader because of how he chooses to use the dark side and go about his issues. Not only that, but the so-called noble cause that Baylan is fighting for now becomes more clear. We believe that Baylan intends to use the world between worlds as a way to set history correct, to make right the falsehoods of the past by not allowing Anakin Skywalker to be trained, perhaps by even outright killing him as a boy. This would ideally set the past in the correct motion in Baylan's eyes, to where Order 66 would never happen and the Galactic Empire would never rise. He holds Anakin and Ahsoka responsible for breaking their oaths as Jedi. This is the promise that they did not keep. And this is the promise that Baylan echoes to Sabine. Behind each of them is a path of death and destruction. By training Anakin Skywalker, they put him next to the most powerful Sith Lord that had ever lived. They gave him access to their knowledge, training, and the vast archives. Baylan is likely using Thrawn to get to the world between worlds, the Grand Admiral as an unfortunate evil. This line also backs up what Baylan says: one must destroy in order to create. Baylan will destroy the past to create a better future, and to set things right in a galaxy where Anakin Skywalker no longer exists. Neither Ahsoka, those who turned their back on the Jedi Order, turn their back on their promise and their vow to protect. Baylan views Anakin as nothing but a destroyer, and that sentiment carries over to Ahsoka as well by nature of her being his former Padawan. Reckless, powerful, not listening to the commands of a wider order. Dangerous. Baylan shows a few times that he does not wish to kill Ahsoka, especially when he says, "It didn't have to come to this." If all of this is true, then Baylan will prove to be one of the most exceptionally complex and interesting antagonists that we have yet to see in quite a while. Him working with Thrawn will be an amazing watch, and I believe we are in for one exciting ride for the rest of the series. But what do you think of this, my friends? What are your thoughts on Baylan's intense hatred for Anakin Skywalker and Ahsoka Tano? Them not keeping their words, and ultimately proving to be the destruction of the Jedi Order after each of them walked away from it in ruin. As always, my friends, thank you so much for watching, and may the Force be with you.